Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces, so really appreciate you taking your time to come out. So I work for Norfolk Rivers Trust. We were once a very small charity based just in North Norfolk doing some little river restoration, some quite small projects, and we have grown very, very quickly in the last few years. So we're up to 30 staff now, and what we're trying to do is landscape scale recovery. We know that we can't do that alone. We're trying to use natural solutions, and beavers are one of the things that can help. It's a tool that can help recover rivers in a far better way than we can ever manage on our own. So I'll tell you a little bit about them tonight, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions as well. So a little bit about my background. I am an ecologist. I graduated from the UEA a few years ago, and have basically been living the dream at Norfolk Rivers Trust. I've been very, very lucky. I worked in outdoor education for a bit as well at Holt Hall, which was fantastic, really good opportunity. And then started off with the Rivers Trust one day a week as an EEO, the Eel Education Officer, and moved on up. So I deal mostly with species surveys. We have a lot of fun in the water. We do fish surveys, water vole surveys, crayfish surveys, lots of water sampling. And I'm really lucky that I still do some engagement work as well. So I work with schools and volunteers, and we've got a volunteer coordinator now who does all the volunteer activities. So if anybody wants to come along and sign up with us, you're more than welcome to, and help us out on some of our days. So yeah, that's just a rough idea of what I get up to on a day-to-day basis. So beavers are our hot topic at the moment. You've probably seen quite a lot in the press recently. They're being covered really well, and there is sort of some pros and cons to beavers, and there is some good press and some bad press. And unfortunately, the bad press isn't always very well presented. They don't give both sides. So I'm here tonight to discuss the pros and cons, and hopefully at the end of this you'll all come to be beaver believers. So the project has been running probably for 10 years or so. It did take us a very long time to get it up and running, and that's partly because beavers weren't recognised as a native species. So that was one of the biggest hurdles. They had to be recognised as a native species. And even when they were recognised as a native species, they were recognised as not ordinarily present, because they have been missing from the landscape for quite a long time, sort of roughly about 800 years ago. Licensing is always a challenge, because we have to jump through all the hoops, all the health screening, all the landowner permissions, all of the paperwork involved around reintroducing a species. So that's always a long slog, and finding the right landowner who has the right parcel of land for us to put an enclosure on was also challenging. And thankfully we hit the jackpot with our landowners, and they've been amazingly supportive of the project. So we've got a 7-hectare enclosure up in North Norfolk. The costs as well, we had to do some fundraising, and we were very lucky again. We had some really good supporters who helped us fundraise for the various aspects, buying the beavers, putting the fencing in, doing all the paperwork. Obviously it involves a lot of staff time. And then the health screening as well was a big challenge, so that is really expensive too. The beavers were brought over from Scotland, and they were from an unknown source. So they had to be health screened and quarantined before we could release them into our enclosure, to make sure that they were healthy, that they didn't carry any diseases, and that they were genetically suitable too. We obviously have the ongoing monitoring, and the UEA have been fantastic supporting us, so is UCL, and we've had a few other universities and students involved too, which is really good. And that's part of what Norfolk Rivers Trust love to do, is we love to support students in research and monitoring, because everybody learns and everybody benefits from it. And then obviously future planning. So the government has released a statement to say that there is an expression of interest allowed if we want to release our beavers. So we have submitted an expression of interest to release them in the future. At the moment it hasn't quite been approved. We have a little bit more work to do, but we're hoping at some point we might be allowed to release them. But there is a lot more work to do still, and it's a big piece of paper to do, unfortunately, but we're willing to put in the effort, I think. So stepping back in time, Beavers are an ancient species. There were a number of species in the past which are now extinct. So we had Agnotocasta, which is the oldest known beaver, and they were rat-tailed, so they're a little bit more like a muskrat. We had Castoroides, which was an Ice Age giant beaver, and there's a little bit of a scale there to show you just how big they were, next to Justin Beaver. We had Trogontherium, which is the one that was found in the Cromer fossil beds. So we have had large beavers here in the past. And Dipoides, which is a semi-aquatic Arctic species with very rounded teeth. And it was discovered that they did eat wood, but they didn't use wood in their dams and lodges. And then Paleocasta, which was a terrestrial burrowing beaver. And they were only discovered because a farmer found these unusual corkscrew forms in his soil when he was excavating, and nobody could work out what had caused these corkscrew structures. And they were said to be the devil's corkscrews. However, when they excavated them, they found the remains of these tiny rodents, and they were an ancient beaver fossil. So very, very interesting. There are lots of different types of beavers in history. These days, we've only got the 2 extinct species, and they roughly developed about somewhere between 5 to 3 million years ago. There's varying sources on the internet. So Castor canadensis is the North American beaver, and Castor feber, which is the Eurasian beaver, and our beavers are Eurasian beavers. So they are 2 different species. They're the world's 2nd largest rodent after capybara, and they were both almost extinct by the late 1800s because of the beaver wars. They were hunted almost to extinction for their castoreum and for their fur. Currently, both are fairly widespread now, which is fantastic, and the Eurasian beaver is spreading very quickly, which is really nice to know. So they have 2 separate numbers of chromosomes, and they can't hybridize. I believe there were a few trials, and one pair did hybridize. However, their offspring didn't survive very long. So they are quite distinctly separate. Those are just maps to show the sort of rough distribution. So this was post-Ice Age distribution of Eurasian beaver. This isn't current. This is just a little infographic telling you the differences between them. So Eurasian beavers have a much more pointed tail, short fur. They're bigger in size, so Americans don't always go bigger. And they have a very triangular nose, whereas the American beavers have a very round tail and a square nose opening, and they are smaller and often darker. Although saying that, apparently Eurasian beavers can vary considerably in colour too. So there's our lovely Eurasian beaver. They are much bigger than I expected. I was really surprised actually when they arrived. We had them in crates, and we had to carry the crates around, and they were really heavy. Sort of roughly 30 kilograms, and I've got a golden retriever and he's 32 kilograms, and you suddenly think, gosh, they are big. And that from some of the feeding signs we see in our enclosure, you can tell where they stand on their hind legs, they're feeding at quite a height. They are much bigger than expected. So in ancient history, humans and beavers have co-evolved very closely. In some ancient settlements, they found that ancient humans probably used beaver cut wood to build our shelters because we couldn't cut wood ourselves that easily. So we just stole wood from the beavers who could cut it non-stop. In Cumbria, some Neolithic wooden forks were found, and basically they found beaver teeth make very distinctive gnawing marks, and so wood that has been carved by beavers is really quite distinctive. So these forks have been found with beaver chewing marks on them. Hunters use beaver meadows to catch deer. So beavers create amazing meadows, and animals flock towards them, and it makes a perfect hunting spot for hunters. Beaver ponds also are perfect for fishing, being amazing little nurseries for small fish as well as big fish. The fur and meat was used to survive in cold winters. Beaver fur is very dense, and it is still one of the most hunted and traded furs in the world. Beaver dams were used to cross rivers, and on some of the First Nation crossings, those are ancient beaver dams, and some of them are actually visible from satellite, which is fascinating in the States. Beaver teeth were used for chiseling and scraping, and some of the First Nations' oldest stories are all about how beavers molded primordial mud into islands fit for humans, which I think is just a lovely way to think of how beavers helped humans survive and grow. So there are some very ancient findings. So these idols carved using beaver teeth, again, very, very distinctive scrapings. Beaver teeth amulets were found in Anglo-Saxon burial grounds, and they are gold capped. Apparently there are 6 of them that have been found, and they're thought to be probably because beavers were very highly prized, and possibly shamanism or magic kind of beings were thought of, the beavers were thought to be some kind of magical being as opposed to just an animal. And then castoreum, which is this sort of oily secretion from their scent glands, has been found on ancient throwing darts, either as a binding or a waterproofing material. So beavers were used in many forms across our evolution, I suppose. So this is what's one of the reasons they were hunted to extinction almost, is castoreum. So these are their scent glands. It's a sticky, sort of waxy secretion, and it's used for waterproofing and scent marking by beavers. And they actually have an evolved thumb, so it's a split thumb, and the way they groom themselves is they use their castoreum and the split thumb to cover themselves to keep themselves waterproof. It dates back, so the use of it in human medicine dates back to about 500 BC, where Hippocrates recognized the healing powers of castoreum. Because beavers eat a lot of willow, they build up a lot of salicylic acid, which is a really amazing healing herb, basically. So using beaver castoreum helped people with lots of ailments. It's also used for perfume and flavourings in ice cream and chewing gum. And there's also a Swedish spirit. Has anybody had the Swedish shots? No? No? Did you get one? No. So apparently it's quite popular in Sweden, and it's made from castoreum. Apparently it's kind of vanilla-y, raspberry kind of flavours, so it's not unpleasant. So the fur trade was the other reason that they were nearly hunted to extinction. So we started using furs probably way before time immemorial, really. Beaver pelts were found in Neolithic and Iron Age hoards all over East Anglia. So we know that they were pretty widely spread across East Anglia or traded. There was lots of intensive trapping and trading between Russia and China as well. So beaver fur was very, very intensely traded, and obviously through the States as well. In 940, there was a law passed that beaver pelts were reserved only for royalty, which made them even more valuable, which then ramped up the hunting and trapping. Beaver pelts became very scarce in the 16th century, and that ramped up their value even further. There was what's called a made beaver, which is a male beaver collected in winter. That's when they're at their fattest, at their best condition. And it was a currency at one point, and then later a made beaver coin was created. Beaver hats were one of the most sought after items, and an antique white gold beaver fur sold for, it was £25,000, so really, really valuable, and they still are very valuable. So beaver trapping and trade fueled the exploration of Canada and the settlement there as well. Approximately 1 million beavers were trapped every single year. I mean, they are rodents, they do breed like rodents, but that's an unsustainable amount of trapping. The Beaver Wars broke out because of the territory and the trading and the battles between First Nation and French and English and Americans and Canadians. And then between 17 and 1770, 21 million beaver hats were exported from England, which is huge, huge numbers. Thankfully, silk became fashionable and beaver furs became unfashionable. And that is probably what saved beavers in the end. So jumping back to the more recent past, there have been a number of reintroductions into the UK. In 2009, the Scottish beaver trial kicked off, and that was pretty successful, but it was in an enclosure. In 2014, there were some unsanctioned or escaped beavers found in the River Otter, and that started the River Otter beaver trial. Because they were out living wild, Natural England initially wanted to cull them. However, the locals fought for them, and the Wildlife Trust actually said, let's do this as a 5-year trial, see how we get on. And after the 5 years, it was such a success mostly that they were quite happy to leave them there, which is really good news, I think, because it has fueled so much beaver research and so much support for beavers. So now, in a lot of enclosures, they're all over the country, and that map is actually quite old now. There are a lot more dots on the map now. So there are loads and loads of enclosures, and there are a number of unsanctioned, free-living beavers where they have escaped from enclosures. So apparently 50% of beaver enclosures fail, and they do escape. They are quite tenacious species. So Kent have a number of unsanctioned beavers living wild now. They're all over Devon, they're all over Scotland. So I suspect they will be spreading quite quickly once they get breeding. In Norfolk, we've got Kenhill, we've got the Hawk and Owl Trust, and we've got our ones in the River Glaven. They're all in enclosures, and as far as I know, hopefully none have escaped. So we're safe for now. So a lot of people say, why the Glaven? We're really lucky. We've got some amazing landowners on the Glaven. We've been working closely with them for quite a long time. So we know that beavers were widespread about 800 years ago. They only went extinct because they were trapped to extinction. It wasn't for any other reason. So bringing them back, there was no argument about climate change or about unsuitable conditions. Since then, our rivers have been very, very heavily modified. They're unnatural, they've been dredged, they've been straightened, they've been disconnected from their floodplains. We've lost all that large woody debris because we've become so tidy. We want things to look neat. We've lost that stochastic change. We don't have beavers just felling trees and changing flows and digging new routes and new channels. And that is what a lot of wildlife benefits from. And we've also lost a lot of aquatic species. Declines in water quality and water quantity are becoming more and more of an issue. We know that Norfolk especially is a very dry county, and future predictions say that we're going to get even drier, which is quite concerning. So the list of reasons to have beavers is really long. I could go on, and they might not be the entire solution. However, they can help reset some of the damage that has been done. So this was the site where we released them into. We had to dig a suitable receptor pond for them. So the River Glaven where we released them was basically about 1 metre wide and about 6 or 7 centimetres deep at best. So we had to create a pond, and this pond was kind of a boggy patch anyway. So the pond had just been dug in this photo, which is why it's quite turbid. And that's the crate I was talking about when we had them delivered. So we had CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, filming us. It was a really hot day. It was pretty stressful. The beavers had done a long trip all the way from Devon. And we released them into this lovely little pond. And I'm hoping the video will work. So there they are. That's Winnie and Robin. And there they go. So this is the moment they kind of noticed each other. Winnie was very enthusiastic to come out. She came straight out of the crate. Robin took quite a bit longer. He's really quite shy. But they were very, very happy, I think, to be back in water.
Haven't they met before?
Yes, they were trapped together.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah, so we think they were probably quite a young pair who'd both set up a new home somewhere. And that's your classic beaver tail slap. So that's the warning sign they give. And when you hear it in person, it's earth-shattering. It's really amazing.
And that's the pond, that dug, is it?
Yes, that's the pond, yeah. So a little bit about beaver lifestyles. They have quite a unique lifestyle, and a lot of children seem to know how beavers live, which is fascinating, whereas adults seem to have forgotten. So when we do schools work, kids seem to know all about beavers, whereas a lot of adults confuse beavers and otters. So they've got a fairly long-lived lifespan, 7 to 8 years, even longer in captivity, sometimes up to 20 years. They reproduce from 2 to 3 years of age. They mate for life, so normally you get your mated pair and you have a colony of beavers living together, often 10 to 12 beavers. Their offspring will stay with them until they're ready to disperse at the age of 2 or 3 years old, if there is suitable territory. If the territory is unsuitable, sometimes they will just stay with the family and they will not breed, they will just stay and help with the offspring, the further offspring. They are extremely territorial and they will fight to the death. So that is one almost method of population control. They are very, very aggressive and they're big animals. So a large male will defend his territory and he will fight off any sort of young interlopers who might come along to try and challenge him. They live in a lodge made of sticks and mud, and they build these lovely chambers basically. So they enter underneath the water and they come up into a very dry chamber. So the lodges that we've got at our enclosure initially started out as just quite a small little mound, and the lodge that they've got now is, 15 metres across, would you say? Yeah, something like that. It's huge. It's really exciting to see, and the amount of work that's gone into it is immense. It's fascinating. So really, really interesting. They have multiple entrances as well, and I suspect that's a way to avoid predation because otters do go into them. Otters are predators of beaver kits. So with otters on the upper Norfolk, there is a chance that they will at some point take some kits. Oh yeah, they are herbivores. So that's one of the biggest myths, that they'll eat all the fish, and that's something we get regularly, but no, beavers are herbivorous. They feed mostly on herbs and terrestrial vegetation and aquatic roots and vegetation. And then in the autumn and the winter, they'll fell trees and they'll strip the bark and eat the cambium layer. And they use the wood to build dams and to build their lodges as well. And their teeth are reinforced with iron, which is a really cool fact for children because they're orange teeth. So one of the reasons for introducing beavers, I'm sure most of you will understand the impacts of climate change and how it is going to affect us in the future. Beavers can help mitigate some of those impacts. So we've got ecosystem restoration done by beavers, and that can address lots of issues related to climate change. So beavers alleviate the impacts of flooding and drought. We've got lots of fish and amphibian declines. And beaver habitat creates the most incredible pools and ponds and freshwater systems for amphibians and fish. We have lots of abstraction because we've got so much development going on, and beaver pools help groundwater recharge. So we're hoping that in the long run, with all of these developments, if beavers are in our landscape again, our landscapes will be a little bit safer because of their ponding activities. Our groundwater and our aquifers are drying up as well, with increasing numbers of drought years and with all the abstraction and heavily intensive agricultural landscape. We do have to think about our water resources. With the 1.5 degree temperature change as well, that will affect so many aquatic species. A lot of fish can't digest food, for example, if the water's too warm. Eels and trout, for example, are not able to grow. if water is too warm. There's decreased oxygen in warm water as well, which impacts a lot of species. So with beavers, we hope that they can help a little bit as we go. So they are keystone species and ecosystem engineers. A keystone species is a species that has disproportionate effect on its natural environment relative to its abundance. So in our enclosure, initially we just had 2 beavers, and the number of trees they felled and dams they built and landscape scale changes they have made was incredible. We've now got, we think, 8 or 9 beavers probably in there, because they've been breeding quite well, and they just keep amazing us every day. So they really do have a massive impact on the natural environment. And ecosystem engineers are species that modify their environment in a significant manner, creating new habitat or modifying existing ones to suit their needs. So they don't do it to benefit everything else, they do it for their own selves. However, the impacts that they have on so many other species is incredible. So like I said, they build these ponds, which are really good nursery habitats for fish and for amphibians. All the standing dead wood is incredible habitat for woodpeckers. You've got loads of detritivores and all of those fungi and lichens and mosses and things that grow in this damp environment. So we've got a lot of people monitoring these changes in the enclosure as well, which is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to seeing, well, we've had fish appear now. We didn't have any fish in the enclosure before. We did some fish surveys and I did crayfish surveys and there was nothing, and we've just got stickle back in. So things are starting to come. So climate change, we are expecting to see more drought, more extreme precipitation, more extreme temperatures. So the Met Office annual averages are increasing, and you can see how dark it is in our kind of patch. The rainfall amount is decreasing potentially, but with more extreme events. We're getting wetter and warmer winters, and all of that water has to be held somewhere. We're also expecting, we're experiencing very unpredictable seasons, and I'm sure most of you will have noticed it's so much warmer this year, it's quite worrying. All of those lead to impacts on the food security, the economy, the landscape, farming, and it can lead to wildfires. So we have had a number of wildfires in North Norfolk over the last few years. Those photos are just examples of how they can affect our farming landscape, for example. And we have a very active farm team who work with a lot of local farmers to protect their soil in these extreme rainfall events and in very dry events. So we discuss with them how better to manage their soil to help alleviate these issues. So beaver wetlands bring massive benefits. They clean the water, and that's really, really cool. We've had one of our students and one of our ex-members of staff do quite an intensive study on how beavers clean water. And it was almost consistently dam after dam after dam that the water filtered and was cleaner and cleaner, which is just amazing to see. So they filter out pollutants. Those pollutants could be from agricultural runoff or from road runoff or from septic tanks and from sewage outfalls. Carbon capture is a big thing. So beaver dams lock carbon. So there's a lot of plant growth that's associated with beaver ponds and beaver activity too, and that also helps lock carbon. So the dams are made of mud and sticks and then inundated, so all of that carbon sequestration is going on. They reduce flooding, so they slow the speed of water in those peak flows. And it just reduces that kind of initial peak flow. If we get a massive, massive deluge of rain, those beaver dams just help slow the water. So beavers create almost like a rice paddy effect, a series of terraces, spreading the water sideways and reducing the flow, the energy of the flow. If we have our unnatural, heavily modified rivers, they are just deep, straight canals, and that just rushes the water straight down, often affecting businesses and homes, flooding streets and areas that we don't want them to flood. Now, beavers are known for creating some flooding, but on a very small scale, and it is easily managed. And that's something that people need to bear in mind. I mean, we have had some conflict with beavers. However, overall, beaver mitigation is actually very easy to do and relatively cheap too, compared to the cost of flooding on infrastructure. They also help prevent drought. So beaver ponds hold water, they recharge groundwater. And in that drought we had a few years ago, I think it was 2018, was it? I think I can't remember. A few years ago anyway, the whole landscape was parched. However, in the beaver enclosure, it was just verdant green. It was absolutely beautiful. And the birds were just flocking there to bathe in the ponds and pools. And they create habitat for abundant wildlife. So as I've mentioned, it creates nurseries for amphibians and fish, and fills with wildflowers. It's just incredible. We've had pot McGeetons growing in the beaver ponds where there was terrestrial soil. So those seeds must be in the seed bank somewhere and growing again. And obviously lots of insects and lots of birds too. We have also had otters in the beaver enclosure, so they must be able to climb over the fence. We've had stoats, we've had a water rail recently too, which is really exciting. So all sorts is coming in. So dams and dead wood are really amazing agents of morphological change, they're described as. So dead standing wood is really important for lots of wildlife, as I mentioned, for fungi and mosses and lichens and woodpeckers and all those little detritivores that help break down and assist with nutrient cycling, basically. So we've got just some pictures of the habitat that the beavers have created. So that picture up there is just, we started mapping where some of the dams had been made in the beaver enclosure. There's probably quite a few more to add since then. That was done a year ago or so? 2 or 3 years ago, yeah. So there's probably quite a few more dots on there. This picture's a little bit hazy, but this is just an example of some of the felled trees. That's one of the big ponds that they've created. So that dam is probably 40 or 50 meters long and about 2.5 feet high, and that's it from another angle. So you can see they do create flooding, and they can flood out trees. So that if there was an orchard, for example, or some kind of economical benefit for those trees, you'd probably manage that dam, but in this case we didn't need to. And they help with natural stream restoration. So as I mentioned previously, Norfolk Rivers Trust deliver a lot of river restoration. We try and reset rivers to a more natural state. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of staff, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of carbon because we have to use a lot of machinery at the time. Beavers can do it for free. So if we can help them help us, then that's fantastic. We can work together very closely with them. So this is just an example of what our current streams mostly look like. They're very single-channeled, deeply canalised, dredged habitats. They're not connected to the floodplain at all. And the water table along the bottom just gives you an idea of how it changes. So as beavers start damming, the water starts to move and it gets a little bit more sinuosity, which means the oxygen gets into the water. There's a little bit of scour, so trout, for example, will lay their eggs on the gravels that are scoured clean. Once beavers become established, they might start building dams right across the whole channel. And then that creates lots of braided side channels. And it creates a whole different landscape, and the water table changes completely too. When you get really varied landscape changes in aquatic environments, you find that so many different species thrive. If you had water voles, for example, living in this habitat, and you had a mink come through, you've only got one channel for that mink to find those water voles, and they are unlikely to survive. If you have water voles living in this habitat, a mink is going to have to search a lot harder to find those water voles. So they're much more likely to survive. And it's the same for most species, for otters and fish, for example, nesting birds, all sorts. So having a very complex habitat benefits a lot of different species. So beaver dams can help store sediment, and that's one of our big challenges in Norfolk. There's a lot of erosion. Some of it's through agricultural practices or poor soil management. Some of it's because we've got so many really big heavy cars and so many cars on our roads these days, and on very, very small roads. So that's in my village in Aldborough, North Norfolk, and that happens year on year on year, and all of that soil runs straight off into the River Beaver, and that's what it looks like, which is terrible. So beaver dams can help just filter out that sediment, and these are some of the trials that were done at the River Otter Beaver trial in Devon, because they also have a lot of sediment issues in their catchments. So above the beaver dams, you can see there was quite a lot of suspended sediment. Below the beaver dams, it had filtered out considerably. So they can help a lot. And that's really good because they smother, the sediment can smother all the trout spawning gravels, and normally trout spawn when we get our first autumnal rains. So you really want those gravels clear for them to spawn on and lay their eggs on. It can block respiratory systems of a lot of invertebrates and crayfish. It can carry pollutants and reduces visibility for things like great crested newts during their breeding season in the spring when they're flashing their tails. If the water's turbid, they can't see each other. And same for fish in their mating colours as well. Road sediment can carry all sorts of microplastics from tyres and brake fluids and oils, which we don't want in our watercourses. So one of the things that I teach in schools is only rain down the drain, because a lot of people don't understand that a lot of road drains lead to our watercourses, to rivers and ditches. And agricultural sediment carries all sorts of things too. So the less of that in our watercourses, the better. So these are just some of the other water quality trials and amphibian counts. So we can see above, oh, my battery's running low, it says. Oh no, what's going on? Thanks. Oh no. What's not plugged in? That says on. It's back on, but my laptop's not. You can have a break if you want, chat amongst yourselves. So that's plugged in, that's plugged in. Is that light coming on?
That should be on now. No, it's gone.
I'm going to plug this in, but I don't know if...
Still got it.
That's definitely plugged in.
Have you got it on a flash drive?
No, I haven't. How odd. See if it goes. I don't want to unplug that because I think that might go to the projector.
No, don't use that socket.
It's that one, yeah. I wonder if this one's not working either because that wasn't charging and this isn't coming on.
Oh, was that plugged into that socket?
That was there, and this was into that one, but the light I've just realised isn't coming on.
I think we've got no choice but to do that. Oh, right. Okay. You just...
Ah, excellent, hopefully. Laptop success. I think we might... I think it's working again. Ah, okay. So that, I don't know what that plug was for. It might just be the audio. Thank you. Exciting.
Working?
The projector's just coming back on, hopefully. They normally take a few minutes, don't they?
Did you press anything on here?
I pressed it on again. It did take a few minutes. Yeah, it took a few minutes to switch on earlier. So
Anything?
there we go. The lights come on.
Yay!
Yeah, there we go. Right. How do I get this to show again? Okay.
Got it.
Hooray! Thank you for your help, Jake. So back to the presentation, not flustered. So these are just, again, trials from the River Otter Beaver trial. And that whole document is available online, which tells you all of the research that went on, all of the findings, and it's absolutely fascinating to read. So a number of things were measured upstream and downstream of the beaver dams and lodges. So the sediment decreased considerably, nitrogen decreased, I think, by 70%, phosphorus reduced by 5 times, and then dissolved carbon is a funny one because dissolved carbon sounds like a bad thing, but actually a lot of wetlands are full of carbon because plants need it to grow and to be taken up. So beavers can release carbon, which sounds like a bad thing, but if it's being used up in the wetland environment, it's fine. Frogs are benefiting considerably. So these are the counts of frog spawn. So in 2011, before the beavers were there, they were already monitoring the frogs there. And in 2011, there were very, very few clumps of frog spawn. And by 2016, only 2 years after the beavers had been introduced into that catchment, you can see they'd rocketed. They'd done really, really well. So in our enclosure, we had a burst of spawn at one point, which was really exciting to see. I looked into one of the dams and I sort of thought, what's that? I could just see this black mass writhing along one of the logs. And as I got closer, I realized it was just loads of tadpoles. And then interestingly, about a week later, a load of diving beetle larvae appeared and they were demolishing the tadpoles. And we hadn't seen any diving beetle larvae there before. So fascinating that they knew exactly where to come and where the food was. That's just a little video of them. A bit shaky. I was standing on a bit of a precarious bank. I didn't tell you that, Jonah. This is my manager, so I can't be too rude. So the Beaver Trust are an organisation that has been set up in response to all of the beaver kind of research and beaver releases. They've supplied us with our beavers and they do some amazing work. So you can follow them on any social media, you can go to their website, and they are pushing a lot of the data now. They're doing loads of research, and these are some of the things that they found. So the habitats for invertebrates is just huge. So we know that dragonflies and damselflies are really benefiting from these wetland habitats. Bats as well are really, really thriving in our beaver enclosure, which is fantastic to see. So we have got a lot of old wood with really big ivy stands, but that woodland was managed quite a lot, and now the bats are really coming in where there's lots of cracked trees and loads of invertebrates, loads of midges and insects starting to develop from those beaver ponds. Bats are really starting to thrive. We're also working with the Norwich Bat Group because the site has 2 old bunkers, and we're going to create some bat roosting habitat inside the bunkers for them there. These are some videos that we've taken with trail cameras. So this one, you do have to watch quite carefully, but this is a water shrew, which we didn't know were on site, which is really nice to see. So it sort of swims around a little bit and then it appears just along the edge of the water and it'll scuttle up. There he comes. That's one of our most exciting finds, I think, wasn't it? We were really thrilled to see that. And then this video is a bit of a compilation of videos of animals and beavers in the enclosure. This is dam building. This is very adept climbing, which we did not expect. They can climb really well. So that's using that split thumb to groom. Tail slap. Polecat. They're very selective about where they put their sticks as well. They don't just sort of lay it anywhere. They really choose where their sticks go. So lots of wildlife, and those are quite old. We do need to put together another compilation, don't we, I think. So wildfires have become quite a major issue across the world, and Norfolk is going to really start struggling, I think, with wildfires in the future. And we know we had this major incident at Ken Hill a few years ago when we had the drought. In the beaver enclosure, everything was lush green and very, very damp underfoot, despite the fact that there was a pretty severe drought across the landscape. There's a number of students and biologists in the States who are studying the impacts of beavers on landscape and how they can help protect landscapes from wildfires. And you can see those wildfires have ravaged the landscape. However, where the beavers have set up home, it's still a lush verdant green, and so many animals can flock into there and use that landscape or that beaver lodge or beaver dam complex as a refuge in those wildfires. And there's a lovely little video by a lady called Emily Fairfax, which just demonstrates how beavers can help protect the landscape. It's a great one to show children as well. So I mentioned mitigation and the fact that beavers can be quite controversial. They do create some flooding. It's more localized flooding. It's not often extreme. They can fell some trees. That's kind of what they do best. And if you have a lovely orchard or a valued tree in your garden, or if you have a commercial crop of trees, that can be quite difficult to manage. However, you can wire them, you can paint them. It doesn't cost a lot to do, and you can protect your trees, or you can fence your crop as well, or your garden. You can put in flow levelers, they're called, and basically they're pipes, and you set them at the level that you are happy to have that beaver dam at. And no matter how big the beaver builds the dam above that, it'll always maintain that level. And roughly, I think those mitigation costs are only sort of £200 to £500 each, which is very little considering how much biodiversity benefit and landscape services and natural ecosystem services beavers can bring to our country and to our rivers, really. So that's me done. Hopefully I have converted some of you to being beaver believers, and if I have, please spread the word. I've got some time for questions if anybody would like to ask anything. Or have I astounded everybody? Yeah.
How big a sort of stream or river will they choose to live in? I mean, would they choose on a big navigable river, or would they tend to go for a smaller sort of tributary?
From what we know, it's mostly just headwaters, so it's really small streams. Yeah, they don't seem to really be able to dam big rivers because of the flow. It just washes away any twigs and mud. So from what we know, it's mainly just sort of little, I don't know, 1 metre wide kind of channels. It depends on the flow and the volume as well, but yeah, small first order water courses. Yeah.
What predators do beavers have, apart from otters coming in and taking the grass?
So in the UK, nothing, unfortunately. However, yeah, otters will take them. And then in the States and in Europe as well, bears, lynx will take them, wolves will take them as well. But in the UK, we are lacking in those top predators. So yeah, just otters at the moment. Yes.
I'm just wondering whether you have future plans for spreading out, as it were, or establishing other enclosures in Norfolk. I'd be interested to know what they are.
We did have some plans, however, Natural England have actually stepped back from enclosures because of welfare concerns in some issues, and also because now there is the mechanism to do free releases. They don't want enclosures, they want free releases. It's just a lot harder to do. So hopefully, no. We might trial some more enclosures as a temporary soft release kind of plan. However, that we need to speak to a lot of people, and whether Natural England would even permit it is the next question. They've said that if we want to, we have to have really good evidence that that soft release kind of process would be temporary and that it would result in a wild release in the end. Yeah.
Can you go over again how big the enclosure was that you built for the beavers, and how big was the pond you dug?
So the enclosure is one of the smallest. It's only 7 hectares. It's really quite small. The pond must have been about 30 metres wide.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really quite small.
Yeah, quite little.
Less than a quarter of the stream, the original pond. But they've turned that into probably 3 hectares of wetland or 4 hectares within that 7 hectares.
Yeah.
You mentioned that back in the day that beaver meadows were used for catching deer.
Yeah.
How did that work?
So beaver meadows are fantastic, lovely, lush, grassy meadows, which deer then flock to, which made it very easy for hunters to target.
All right.
Yeah. Tony.
What kind of fence do you need to contain them?
It's called tornado fencing. It's very, very thick wire, so they can't bite through it. And the fence posts are on the outside so that they can't chew through the fences. There's a skirt on the ground as well to stop them burrowing, because they do dig very well. And there is also an angled sort of, what's it called, like an angled section. Yeah, an overhang.
Sounds like it costs a fortune.
Yeah, £16,000 was it? Something like that? Yeah. Yeah. So that was probably our biggest expense, was the fencing alone.
Is that for the whole exposure?
Yeah. 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 Yes.
Has there been any studies around any detrimental effects on wildlife downstream where the beavers build their dams?
Somebody's doing his PhD at the moment on white-clawed crayfish, because nobody really knows how they will cope with beaver dams, for example, because they need that fast-flowing running water. So I'm waiting to hear more results on that, because that'll be an interesting one. However, white-clawed crayfish are so few and far between now. I think in the long run it won't matter too much.
Lady just here.
Oh yes. Hi.
Thank you, there's some really interesting information in there. I'm also interested in sort of the long-term plans. In terms of a reintroduction for the species to be truly wild, what sort of numbers would there need to be for it to be a self-sustaining and genetically diverse population?
That's very underknown, isn't it? If you want to answer, yeah, you might be able to answer better than me.
It's really hard to know.
Yeah.
So they're doing really well in the river otter off the release of just a few pairs. And Devon Wildlife Trust and Natural England have since bolstered the population a bit. And elsewhere, they seem to have done pretty well on a fairly small number of beavers initially, so maybe 5 pairs. Realistically, the more beavers from different genetic stock get in there, the better chance of success they've got. So Natural England would probably be looking at an absolute minimum, I think, of 10 to 20 pairs to start a new population to give yourself confidence of success, I think.
And is it likely that populations will join up? Widely they spread and
Yeah, they do. So in Scotland they've spread between catchments already, and in Devon they've spread between catchments. We don't know how much they'll help to do that, but yeah, they will. Yeah, they're good wanderers if they need to.
Is there gorilla beavering out there, is there?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Not in Norfolk that we're aware of, but certainly in other bits of the country. Yeah.
Great, love it.
Are there any tree species off limit to beavers that their wood is just too hard and can't actually bore into them? And could you talk a little bit about their teeth? How do they maintain such hard, sharp teeth to do the chisel job? Is there a dietary requirement? How do they do it?
So we've noticed in the enclosure, to answer your first question, hornbeam they haven't touched, which I believe is a very hard wood. So that's quite interesting. They do seem to be fond of particular woods. They've nibbled some of the oak, but not really gone for the oaks. They've left them alone pretty much. But they've demolished some hazel and willow and sycamore and the softer woods and sweeter species. In terms of their tooth maintenance, they're like rabbits, so basically they have to chew to maintain their teeth, or they will continue to grow. So that's how they do that. I don't know how they get the iron to fortify their teeth, though. Do you know? No. Doesn't? Yes.
Where they've gone wild, have they been threatened by population?
Have they been threatened? Yeah. So they have been. You mean by human?
I do.
Yes. Yeah, they have, and in some places they were shot quite a lot in Scotland, for example, which has led to them becoming a protected species. So yes, there has been some conflict, and that's largely down to the lack of stakeholder engagement and the lack of proper talks with community. So as part of a wild release process, you have to do a lot of stakeholder engagement. You have to make sure that you have engaged with every single person you possibly can on the ground to make sure that everybody understands what to expect, who to come to if there is a problem, rather than just shooting it or making it unwelcome. There are a number of processes that you can go through to help with a problem beaver. So yeah, we're trying to do all of the proper stakeholder engagement to make sure that people understand who to come to, and that'll be us, and how to manage beavers on the ground. Yeah.
Is there any chance that we will get a wild population of beavers in Norfolk?
I think yeah. I'm pretty sure we will get there.
It will happen. There are quite a few landowners who are interested. We would like to apply for a free release on the River Glaven, but we're not quite ready yet. They're all through the west of England. There's a big population in Kent. We think there are 3 beavers in Essex now, so they will come. I think it'll be a few years away, probably, but they'll come, I think, yeah.
And this is a real awful touristy question, but is there any chance we could go and see them in Glaven?
Yeah, we're happy to organise tours if you want to do as an activity, yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
I know you shared some figures about above the beaver dams and below the beaver dams. Is it a net positive for the river, or does it just make above the dams worse and below the dams better?
Overall net positive, isn't it? Yeah.
A massive positive,
Yeah.
yeah. That's everything that lives in our rivers has evolved with beavers. It's just a more natural landscape. I really can't think of any of our native wildlife that loses out.
So, for example, the sediment, does that is the top of the river just much worse, or
it changes the river completely. So behind the beaver dams, clean fresh gravel is really important in rivers for quite a few different species. For trout spawning, bullheads, mayfly, all kinds of things. And when the beavers build a dam, you immediately lose anything that's behind it because it's flooded out and smothered with silt. But the cascades over the dam create their own little patches of gravel, and the trout can thrive in there. And also if the trout are able to get above the beaver dams, which a healthy, self-respecting trout should be able to do, they grow quicker and they grow bigger. So there's benefits. But the other thing is as well, Ursula's already said that the beavers tend to stick to the headwaters. They will live in the bigger rivers, but they'll stick to the banks. So where they're damming tends to be the small little streams that aren't particularly gravel bed bits of river anyway. So yeah, there's a big, it's a rebalancing. It's a big rebalancing. It's quite dramatic, but everything that lives there is evolved to live with beavers.
They look very similar to the coipu, which they spent years, I know they're an introduced species, they've spent years trying to exterminate, which they finally done, I believe.
I think that's a lot of the concerns are related to people's memories of coipu, and that's why people are quite nervous about beavers, because they burrow and have similar looks. So yes, you're right. Yeah. Yes.
A bit of a naive question. The River Waveney floods quite extensively, round Beccles, Bungay, that somewhere, going that way. Would beavers be able to sort of help with that in a way, so that they would, the flooding wouldn't just go straight across all the agricultural fields? Could that be a...
I don't know the Waveney catchment that well, but I suspect it probably could in some cases if you can hold water up in the headwaters and in all those tiny little streams. Yeah, it does just slow that flow and that peak discharge. Yeah.
It's a really big area that floods a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a problem, for landowners and every type of traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, Emily. Hello.
Thank you, that was great.
Thanks.
What do you think would happen if beavers were released into the waters? Do they have the same benefits as...
This is a really interesting topic. So there are concerns from a lot of people about beavers being released into the Broads, partly because a lot of the stayeds are wooden and beavers might quite enjoy that. Obviously they're navigable channels as well, and that's another concern, because if you've got boats going up and down and people in canoes and wanting to get through, and beaver dams might block it. But I think a lot of the navigable channels are too deep for beavers, I suspect, so they probably wouldn't be able to dam or block them anyway. And you'd probably find they just set up little pockets in the tiny streams and channels and in the little wetlandy, marshy areas, as opposed to in the main Broads. Yeah.
Sort of two questions, partly following on. How well do they do with salt water?
From what we've heard, not particularly well. So the few beavers that have gone down into the sea have become quite unwell, and they don't cope very well with salt water at all, and can die from it. So that's another almost a barrier to them migrating too far across Norfolk. If they're in the North Norfolk streams, they've only really got to the sea to go, and then they're probably unlikely to be able to swim too far up to some of the other streams. I mean, the stiff key to the Glaven they might be able to do. It's not that far, but they don't cope well.
Yeah, just because we've been having a lot of salt surges in the Broads right now. I think it was only 2 weeks ago, so many pike. Like floated to the surface and all died, like really big ones. The salt surge, and you could taste the water and it tasted salty.
Oh.
It was that bad.
Yeah.
And I'd probably be also, all of that data you had earlier with the before and after the beaver dam, is that in a paper or anything?
Yeah, so that's the River Otter Beaver Trial, ROBT, and that's a document online, and you can download it, and it's I mean it's available in public domain, so anybody can download it, and it's just a wealth of knowledge. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
The ecological environmental charities of big landowners in Norfolk, are you working with any, people like the RSPB who own acres and acres? Just wondered if you're working with any of these big organisations.
We are working with the WWT, aren't we, on burbot rather than beavers, but not so much on the beaver side of things yet. Only because we haven't really had the capacity to do that yet, because it's been such a costly process, and it's such a long process. So, no, is the answer.
We'll probably
add something to that from the RSPB perspective. Is the only RSPB beaver reintroduction that I know of is up in Scotland, and that's a singular site that they're working on at the moment.
Is it going well?
Well, I think it's in early days, but yeah, initial signs are. But as an employee of the RSPB, we have to be careful what I say. But I would like them to do more, and they could. But I think, like lots of big organisations with slightly contentious subjects, they go very, very slowly and see where the direction of the wind blows before embracing too wholeheartedly anything that might cause difficulties.
I think that's the problem with beavers. It's that the activities might be contained to an enclosure. However, if they're wild, like the National Trust have released a few wild beavers now, it's the impact on surrounding landowners as well. So you have to have that buy-in from everybody in the landscape. It's not just going to impact your little patch, and that's what makes it so difficult, really.
They have just released it in Africa.
Yes, yeah.
I was going to ask a question. You sort of mentioned Natural England. How helpful are they being about that next stage of wild releases versus the contained ones?
It's hit and miss. I mean, they want it to happen, but they are very cautious, and I think it's probably because they get a lot of abuse.
Yeah, just the stakeholder issues that are the driver.
Yeah. I can tell they want it to happen. They're very supportive. However, they know that they really have to cover their backs. Yeah. So if anybody wants to find out more, it's on norfolkriverstrust.org/beavers. There's a whole lot of information there, and the Beaver Trust website is just full of everything. It's amazing on there, so you can see what they're up to, read all the latest news and research, and sign up to some of their campaigns as well. So I can heartily recommend signing up to the Beaver Trust stuff. So I think we'll call it a day. Yeah, thank you so much.